welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show. This is Neil Geddes-Ward with Andy Chaplin, and you're listening to us in December, I hope, for the Christmas edition. And obviously, we're all getting festive around here. Andy, are you getting festive?
I'm a bit of a bear humbug type person, so I'm not massively into Christmas. However, I've just been to Brighton with a group of friends and had an amazing time. I do like the Christmas lights, actually. The Christmas lights are good.
They are quite impressive. They are quite
indeed.
impressive.
I don't like the incessant commercialisation and inane Christmas carols and songs and things playing on literally every speaker in every shop you go to.
Well, that's it. I don't go to shops much these days.
That's probably the best way to avoid it, actually.
Yeah. I mean, there's only so much you can take Merry Christmas, Everybody by Slade.
I mean, can you imagine working in an all-year Christmas shop, which do exist in various places, where every day... Oh, yeah. Where every day is Christmas. Yeah.
Oh, my God. I mean, for the people working there, Christmas must be an absolute nightmare, in their personal lives, because they've just had enough of it.
Probably end up in asylums, I should imagine.
Yeah, I think you need some sort of counselling or something. Yeah, well, obviously don't apply for jobs in a Christmas shop if you're a real bar humbug type person.
Yeah, so not me.
I actually saw, funny enough, talking about bar humbug, I actually saw this film on Netflix yesterday, and it was called The Man Who Invented Christmas. And it was actually the story of Charles Dickens about how he came up with the whole idea of A Christmas Carol and how he published it in about 5 or 6 weeks just before Christmas. He had to self-publish it and he managed to get it out just in the nick of time. And it became his best-selling book. It was really quite interesting. So much so I actually thought of actually buying the book myself to actually read it, even though I've seen the film so many times.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very paranormal film, actually, if you think about it. It's probably one of the, it's got ghosts of Christmas past. And as a kid, I didn't really understand it. And it's quite a weird concept. You've got ghosts of Christmas past and ghosts of the future and things like that. And you've got this very sort of pagan-looking kind of Christmassy Father Christmas ghost as well, which...
Well, of course, Father Christmas, the whole red and white thing, there's a lot of contention about where those colours came from. Some people say it was to do with Coca-Cola branding their kind of drink along with Christmas and selling it through Father Christmas. Other people say it's to do with the red and white toadstools, the hallucinogens that people used to take in medieval times. So, yeah, I mean, the red and white thing I think is a fairly new phenomena, and I think Father Christmas used to be actually kind of like a dark blue or dark green and white.
I thought he was dark green. I do remember the Coca-Cola connection, hearing that when I was at college, at art college, and they talked about it then. So, interesting. It
is.
Anyway, as we're on the subject of ghosts and spirits, because we are a paranormal peep show anyway, I think it's pertinent that we introduce our guest, who happens to be another fellow presenter on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Do you want to introduce her, or shall I?
You go for it now.
Okay, all right. I have been interviewed by this lady a few years ago myself. I also met her many, many years ago in Scotland, and that's where she's calling in from. And it's Alyson Dunlop of the ADX Files. Hello, Alyson.
Hello, Neil. Hello, Andy. How are you both?
Hello, Alyson. Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. Is it cold up north?
It is really, really cold, very windy, very wet. No, you don't want to be here at all.
But yes, you say that, but have you got snow? Because if you've got snow, we're coming.
Not right now, no. Well, further north, where they do all the skiing up Inverness way, they'll have Cairngorms, they'll have snow up there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Now, you're in Glasgow, aren't you, Alyson?
I'm in Glasgow. I'm in the lowlands, not the highlands.
Yeah, but just outside Glasgow, you got the lovely lakes and things, just literally north of you, haven't you? In I forget what.
Beautiful, yes.
Yeah, and across the way you got the Western Isles, out on the Arran, is it? I can't remember the islands off.
Yeah, well, there's several. There's, you've got the Inner and the Outer Hebrides.
Yeah.
Arran is just across from my hometown of Ayr.
Yes, yeah.
And it's a very magical place. It's got lots of standing stones. And it used to intrigue me when I was a little girl, because you could sit on the beach and some days it was like you could reach out and touch the houses on it, and other days it was completely gone, like Avalon. It just had disappeared.
In the mist.
Yes.
And the fog. Yeah.
Yes.
I remember that when I visited the Isle of Skye, because it was 1 minute you see it, next minute you don't type of thing. Now, I know that when I visited Skye, it was very, very religious. Every cafe, every hotel, every shop had a Bible on its counter. Is it like that in southern parts of Scotland or in Glasgow, or is it a little bit more kind of not so kind of strict, as it were?
Not at all in Glasgow. And I think it was in Skye once, and it was just like, I run round it in my friend's car. I think we went into one shop, and it was a small shed type thing, and the guy was making Celtic things. He looked very pagan himself. I don't know whether he was, but he looked it. So I never saw all this. This is news to me, this Bible on every counter thing. But in the islands, having said that, they are Free Presbyterian. So they are very, very religious people. But in the lowlands and probably in other places in the Highlands, no. The rest of Scotland, I wouldn't say so. I mean, they are religious. People are religious and spiritual too, not necessarily religious. But they wouldn't necessarily have Bibles everywhere.
Could it be possible that there's a Bible Belt as such in Scotland?
Well, yeah. I mean, if that's a good way of putting it.
I think there is.
Yeah, I would say the Hebridean Islands would possibly come under that, because they are, as I say, Free Presbyterianism is pretty different from Presbyterianism, in that there are certain rules that you tend to follow, like. Now, this is a friend who came from Uist told me this, that the women are not supposed to have their hair cut short. You wear a hat to church. Women wear dresses and skirts, no trousers. So all these kind of things. Now that is completely absent from the Church of Scotland, Presbyterian Church. So it is pretty. You might call it strict. Maybe they don't feel that they're, that it's strict when they're in that religion. But I passed one of these churches just up the road from me, and it was the first time I had ever seen anyone coming in or going out, and all the women, right enough, were all wearing hats, and I thought, oh, so that is true. So there you go.
Well, it's interesting, actually, because I've been to, as I mentioned, the Isle of Skye, but I was actually staying on this island called Raasay, which is between mainland Scotland and Skye. And I think it's only got like 50, 60, 70 people on the island, if I remember rightly. And we stayed in this little cottage. My children were very small then. And, of course, I'd take them to the little play park to go on the swings and roundabouts at that age. And there was an official council notice, and I actually took a photo of it because I couldn't believe it. As an official council notice put there on the fence of the play park saying, please do not use this play park on a Sunday.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe that. And I took photos of it. And I was telling all my friends down south, and they couldn't believe it. I said, look, here's the photo to prove it.
Yeah.
And when I lived in the Orkney Islands, which is off the north coast of Scotland, they're not so religious like the west coast. But I remember talking to the vicar on the island that I lived at that time. And he said that he actually came from that area. And he said, yeah, they're very strict out there. He said that he even knew a guy whose job it was to work for the council, whose job it was to go round and actually chain up the children's swings so they couldn't actually use them on a Sunday.
Wow.
Can you believe that?
Not to be confused with chain up the children. That would be very...
I know. I really wondered how
north.
that sentence was going to end.
But you can believe that. You've heard of stories like that, have you, Alyson?
Yeah, I have. It's a little bit like that film Witness, and
the Harrison Ford film with the
you can't. Was it
Amish community?
Yeah, and what's the other one where they weren't allowed to? Was it Footloose? So like there's like no dancing on a Sunday and all this kind of stuff. But you're saying that in the north, the Northern Islands are not so religious, but they do have very they still have very strong beliefs in fairy lore, fairy culture, and it's taught at school as well. The same as in parts of Ireland, they teach the children about fairies. So that's quite strong there.
That's interesting, because the island that I lived on, Westray, which is in the Orkney Islands, we actually had a fairy museum, which was supposedly the only one of its kind in the UK. It was basically a gallery of my pagan and visionary artwork, along with my then wife's research into fairy lore and things. And we had lots of visitors come around from the islands and look at it, and lots of people come over on the boat to look at it. But I never recollect anyone sort of talking about it, the fact that it was taught in schools. I mean, both my children went to the schools there, but they never mentioned anything about being it taught in Westray, but maybe certain schools didn't. Having said that, there were 3 churches on that particular island. It's only about 600 people. And quite a few people went to the churches, but eventually it got to the point where not enough people were going to all 3 churches, and 2 of the vicars had to be made redundant, if you like. And it all came down to 1 church in the end. But yeah, I mean, even mending dresses, I was told, mending dresses on a Sunday because you got a hole in your dress was frowned upon, or putting your washing out on a Sunday is frowned upon. I find that really, really weird in my, obviously, because I'm coming from a totally different set of non-Christian beliefs and things.
Yeah, totally. I mean, they just prefer to keep Sunday as intended in Christianity, as a day of rest, and they take that very seriously and very literally. But I have to tell you this story. It's entirely up to yourself whether you keep it in the show. But my friend who came from the Western Islands, she told me that there was this very, very strict minister. You couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, and he was very, very strict. And every Sunday he would go into his private room and pray, and nobody was allowed in. And when he died, they went in that room, and in that room was a stack of porn, Max.
Praying to the god of porn, the horn god.
God, porn. So, so that was one story. Now, whether it's true or not, I don't know.
We want it to be true.
We won't, but I really want it to be true.
So one of those the islands missed over.
Alyson, what's the kind of like the general Scottish view on the paranormal? Is it something to be celebrated? Do they find it interesting, or is it kind of like hush hush?
Oh no, I would say it's very prevalent in Scotland. It's very celebrated, and we have our conference once a year, which has been really successful and really enjoyed by a lot of people. So yeah, I mean, if you ask any Scot if they have it, it doesn't even matter if they don't believe in it, because that's how they'll start it a lot, especially men will start it. Well, I don't believe it myself, but I'll tell you something strange that happened, and then you'll get this story. So even if they don't particularly believe in the paranormal, they will know of something either that's happened to themselves or that's happened to someone that they know. And
I was going to say, funnily enough, I know I used to play airsoft. I've probably told this story before, which is kind of like paintball, but it's with plastic pellets. And there used to be an abandoned shopping mall in Reading called The Mall, funnily enough. And there was a very kind of like staunchly atheist, doesn't believe in anything type Scots person that used to kind of help organise it and manage it. I don't think he was the actual owner, but he was certainly kind of managing it. And it was absolutely, one of those classical things where I don't believe in any of all this, but and it turns out, and Neil, do you remember one of the guests we had called Ashley Siberini?
Ashley. Yeah.
Ashley. Yeah. You've gone very faint again, Neil. Don't know.
Oh, okay. I'm back again.
Oh, back again. Okay. So Ashley Sabarini was actually one of the zombies at this shopping mall. So during this shopping mall, some of the games, the airsoft games, were zombie based. So people get dressed up in movie style, kind of like zombie makeup, blood everywhere, and there'd be kind of like plastic wrap sheets with blood dripping down them and fake bodies hanging everywhere. So it's all very kind of zombified. So it was actually Ashley who let me know some of the weird ghost stories connected to this mall, because although it was a shopping mall and quite a modern one, it was actually built on quite old land and old shops before it. And there actually used to be a serial killer called Amelia Dyer in the vicinity who used to go to this Reading shopping mall, shops as it was back then, sort of in the 1800s. So anyway, this particular Scottish manager, one thing that apparently happened to him was he was in the canteen area at night. Because sometimes what they used to do on a Saturday, if they were doing something, they would then kind of sleep over sometimes for the Sunday rather than go home. So it makes a lot more sense to kind of like stay in the area if they're going to do 2 consecutive days. So there was he was sleeping in the canteen area. He heard like chairs clacking around in this kind of old canteen area, and he thought it was some of the staff playing up or playing a joke or just buggering about. So he went to investigate. And there was nothing there. Like some of the chairs had been moved apparently, but there's absolutely nothing there. And there was a succession of these various creepy, haunted stories. And he'd actually experienced it himself, but he couldn't explain it. His atheist kind of like rational mind couldn't quite explain what was going on. And apparently his viewpoint on it was, I don't know what it is, why it's happening, but so long as we leave it alone, it'll leave us alone. And that was his kind of philosophy.
Yeah, some people don't believe just because they're scared. Yeah, they're scared to believe, and I've met people like that as well, who even if you present them evidence, they just don't want to know because they're too scared to take it on board.
So for you, Alyson, I mean, obviously you're a believer in pretty a lot of the paranormal, because obviously you've got this show which is now on the Paranormal UK Radio Network called the ADX Files, which is the Alyson Dunlop X Files. But you've been running that show for quite a while before you came onto the network. I mean, your interest presumably led you to develop that show. How did all that begin?
Well, it started, I was at a radio station near Glasgow, and I was doing print reading for the blind there. So I was just reading out the news, the daily news from the papers and recording it. And then we were asked, did anyone want to, they were looking for new presenters. And I said, I'd love to do a show. And they said, what kind of show would you like to do? Well, there was another woman who was doing a pagan show. So I thought, well, it can't be anything pagan related. And I immediately said paranormal, UFO, world of the strange type stuff. And they were delighted with that. And so I started doing that there. And I did 10 shows, but it was only 1 hour once a month. And I really wanted, apart from the fact that I had to, make quite an effort to get there and back, I started to think that it might be better to do the show from home if I could work out how to do a podcast in the house. So that was a whole learning curve in itself. And it took me, it was all kind of, self-trained in radio production, and which was fun, and I really enjoyed doing it. It's the one of the few things in my life that I've stuck at, but that I've enjoyed doing, that I wanted to perfect. I'm not saying that it's perfected, but to begin with, I would like religiously listen over to my shows solely to find out what I didn't like about them. Did I say something a certain way, or did I repeat a certain thing or whatever? And I would make notes not to do it again, which is kind of difficult when you're in the moment and you do it again. But I tried to get it to what I thought was its best, and it was the same with the recording of it and the editing of it. So I've never been a perfectionist about anything really, but that is one of the things that I am quite with the radio show, and I've really fallen into it. But I used to do paranormal stuff, investigations years ago in the 90s with Malcolm Robinson. And so I did an investigation on Jura, which was a UFO incident over there. It started off, people had seen this moving light coming over Glasgow, and it ended up hitting a hillside over in Jura, and it just so happened that I was going to be visiting the next week, so I was able to talk to people who had seen it. So that was one of the things that I did back then. And so I was always quite interested in paranormal things. So when the opportunity to do a show came up, I jumped at the chance.
Wow. So obviously your interest in the paranormal led you to develop the show. And I suppose Andy and I have got kind of points in our lives where we think, I know why I became interested in the strange and the weird, because of something happened, or I saw something on the TV that kind of prompted my think. What was the pivotal moment for you? Presumably going back to childhood, was there something that happened that prompted you in this direction?
I don't know if anything in particular, but because I had a pretty normal childhood, and I don't remember having any paranormal experiences in early childhood. Nothing springs to mind. But when I was 9, we did move into a very old Victorian flat with the first floor and the attic floors, which had been made into bedrooms, and that's where I slept. And it had a great history, it had a great atmosphere, and I really wanted it to be haunted. And the story of it was that it had been built 100 years before by the old woman who had lived there. It was her father who built it, and it was her family home, and she had ended up living there her entire life. And I had this romantic notion that I would do the same, and I really wanted to see this old woman who used to live there, but I didn't see her. But one day I was looking into this. I've got this beautiful wedding photo of my grandparents, and it's a mirror. It's a photograph within a mirror. And I don't know if you've ever seen anything like that before. It's absolutely, I think it's stunning. So I was looking at it. I was looking closer and closer to look at all the detail of it. And I suddenly heard breathing in my ear. And I leapt 10 feet in the air. I ran down the stairs. My brother was at the bottom. I was screaming the whole way. My brother was at the bottom of the stairs, and I jumped into his arms, and I said, "The mirror's breathing." So that was really the only story that I've got from childhood. But when I was about 14, that's when my interest in possession and exorcism began, because my dad used to, when my mum was in night shift, we would sit and watch the old Hammer Dracula films with Christopher Lee in this old Victorian house. And so I really enjoyed these films. And my grandfather said to me one day, I was about 14, he used to buy books whenever he saw them in second-hand shops. And he said, "You like all that horror stuff, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Well, I saw this book, you might like it." And he gave me this book, and it was The Exorcist. He had no idea. He had no idea what was in the pages of this book. And so I read it, and there began a real interest in this subject. And obviously now I give lectures on the subject, and I'm hoping I have a calling to be an exorcist, a deliverance, minister.
Have you been involved in exorcisms yourself?
Not with a person, but I did an exorcism in my flat. Now, a couple of things were happening at the time. I was researching a talk for the conference last year, the 2018 conference, but also I had work stuff going on in the flat, and a workman had come in, and I'd got this bad vibe off him. I don't often get a bad vibe off of people, but there was just something about him. He wasn't unpleasant, but there was just something about him. And when he left, there was still a presence in the flat. It felt like there was still somebody there, and I thought, oh no. And I can only assume that he had left this attachment in my flat. That night, there were noises in the hallway, clicking and clapping and this kind of thing. I went out to investigate, couldn't find anything. The next morning, when I went through to the living room and I opened the curtains, there was this like a slam near the window. And it was like a book being slammed on a book, or the palm of a hand being slammed really hard on top of a book, something like that. And then after that, the kitchen flooded. And I thought, at that point, no, this is not happening. Stood in the middle of the room and I said, you can't settle here, and you cannot attach yourself to me. This is my home and you're not welcome here. I don't care who you are, you're not welcome here. And there was nothing for a fortnight. And about a fortnight later, I woke up with some invisible presence above me. It had me by the wrists. The walls were shaking, and I'd heard scratches from the walls as well. And I just fought off this invisible presence. And I was very angry as well to begin with when things like this, because I have had other experiences of this type of thing, and it would terrify me, as is quite, normal. But that changed at some point to anger if my territory was encroached upon. And
just out of interest, were you angry before this happened, or because?
No, because of it. It dared to attack me, and it wasn't going to happen, and so I fought it off, and that was it. It left for another 2 weeks. Now, during that time, I decided I needed to do a big cleansing and basically an exorcism in the flat. So I did that. I used various things like salt and holy water and holy oil that I'd made these things myself, and blessed them. The holy water was blessed. It was I'd got it at Carfin, which is a beautiful place. It would have been blessed by a Catholic priest, and I blessed it also myself. And so I did this big, and there was incense and whatnot, and signs of pentagrams and crosses everywhere. So I really did the works on the flat. And after that, the only other thing that happened was when I was sitting on the couch, just on my laptop, 2 cats beside me on the couch, and the next thing, the entire ceiling, it was like hailstone on glass. You know that sound? Really heavy hailstones. And I thought, what on earth is that? The only way it could have been coming from upstairs was if somebody was hovering in the middle of the room and throwing lots of little beads on the ground very forcefully, and I couldn't see this happening. So I didn't know what that was, but later on I was reading an account of a possession and the exorcism, or leading up to the exorcism and after the exorcism. There was very similar things to what I'd experienced, like the walls moving, the scratching, the psychic attack, and lastly the hailstones on the ceiling. And it said that this was the energy leaving after the exorcism. It often happens. So I don't know quite what it meant by the energy leaving, whether it was that negative entity's energy leaving or whether it was the energy of the exorcism itself. I'm really not 100% sure. I would have to ask somebody else who knew a bit more than me. But that was a very interesting time, and that was just last year. So,
and you say that the cause of it, the bringing in of it, was due to this man coming to your house. Yeah,
because it hadn't been there before. And I, as I say, I'd got this feeling off of him that I didn't like. I really didn't like it. Now, I had a few workmen coming into the flat at that time, and they were just workmen, and I hadn't really thought anything either way of them, They might have been, pleasant or whatever, and this guy was fairly pleasant, but I just felt there was something about him that I really didn't like. And afterwards, there was this presence that hadn't been there before, and it just felt like somebody was still in the flat. And when you live alone, you know how your flat, how your environment feels.
And you get used to the noises, don't you?
You get used to the noises. And obviously I had the two cats, who incidentally were also looking at the ceiling that night when there was the hailstones, the noise of hailstones. So I just knew there was something else there, and it didn't feel particularly nice. It felt like trouble, and the psychic attack to me proved that it was something negative, definitely.
So it could be him. It could be a number of things. It could be something attached to him. It could be that maybe he's a very either dark or depressed or very negative person. That's a possibility. It could even be a possibility that maybe he's into dark things, maybe like Satanism, paedophilia, whatever.
Yeah.
So if you were to hazard a guess, what would you think might be going on with him?
Well, I personally think there was a negative presence, a negative spirit. What that means, or whether that was having an effect on him. He seemed okay, if a little bit forward and familiar in a way that a workman usually wouldn't be. But apart from that, I wouldn't have thought anything much else of him. But I think that it was a spirit attachment. That's my feeling there. Now, it might have been attached to him because of the type of person that he was, or it may have been something that influenced him. I would need to know him a lot longer to discern that.
And of course, if he's a workman, he's going to be visiting a lot of buildings, and a lot of buildings with weird things going on. Well,
yes, and that is a really good point, that he could have picked this up from anywhere that he'd visited. And I think that we're all vulnerable to these things happening, and we have to be careful where we go and careful what we do in these places, and make sure that we're protected in some way.
I think so. Do you think that exorcisms and kind of like possessions and demonic stuff is more prevalent in Scotland, would you say? Are there, for instance, cases, I don't know if you'd know this, in the Catholic Church where priests are called out to deal with this kind of thing? Do you know if it's on the increase?
Well, according to the Catholic Church, exorcisms are on the increase, and they are trying to get more people involved in exorcism ministry. So I don't know particularly in Scotland, because no one has come to me as yet to say, I'm possessed, I believe I'm possessed, can you do an exorcism? Which is great. That's good. That's good. Despite my calling to be an exorcist, it's great if people are not possessed. So I've not heard of any cases at the moment, but then a lot of people, and quite rightly, go to a trained minister, particularly Catholic priests. They are very, very well trained. In fact, I would love to do the exorcism course that's run at the Vatican. I would really love to do that course, and they've opened it to other churches now. So I'm hoping that maybe one day that will be a possibility to do that. But yeah, they're very well trained, and quite rightly, people tend to go to them. But it's also not very much spoken about. So I don't know how many possession cases there might be in Scotland, because I wouldn't know. You know, I wouldn't be told about it. That would be something that would be under wraps, as it were. So
I suppose it'd be kept confidential because each case is almost like a medical case, isn't it? In their eyes, anyway.
Well, it is, and certainly psychiatrists who agree to an exorcism or request an exorcism because somebody has what they would probably term a possession and trance disorder, or words to that effect, and neurologists often they say that they think it's a neurological condition. Now, who knows? I mean, my belief is that it is a negative spirit, but their possession is so like many psychological and psychiatric conditions that, again, it comes down to the ability to discern the difference. And that is something that I think would take a lot of experience and training.
Alyson, what would you say, or what would you think would be the difference between, say, an episode of psychosis or schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder and something like an actual demonic possession?
Well, I'm not a psychiatrist, and so it's very difficult for me to say and to be able to diagnose somebody as one of those things. And that's why when you come across somebody who believes that they're possessed, you would definitely be involving a psychiatrist in what was going on. You wouldn't be, a religious person should not be dealing with it just themselves, because they might be wrong about it. Yeah. So the difference, I guess, one of the differences, the Catholics have what I call a checklist, and you need to fulfill the requirements of this checklist in order to be classified as possessed. Now, it could be something like speaking in a language that you have never spoken, you don't know. Yeah. Quite often people mention Latin as being one of these languages, or they might have what you might determine as superhuman strength, just uncharacteristically strong, or there may be paranormal things going on in the room, things moving about. So various things like that. They might levitate or do something else extraordinary, or they might also know information that they wouldn't normally know about the person who's conducting the exorcism, or about other people who are in the room, and these are items to look out for, and usually if maybe 3 or more are checked on that list, I would say that you may be looking at a genuine case of possession.
So genuinely kind of paranormal activity, I suppose you could call it. Yeah,
you would be looking for that. I mean, this is a supernatural, a spiritual disease that's happening, and so you will notice these paranormal occurrences around about the person if it's a genuine case of possession.
Have you ever looked into the Enfield case? You probably have, I should imagine.
I've not looked into it. I mean, I know about it, but I've not looked into it. But now, was that the film that was made, the Conjuring 2? I think that was about the Enfield case.
Yeah, it was. I don't think it was. It's kind of very loosely based. I mean, did you see it, Neil? The Conjuring 2?
No, I'm not a great watcher of TV, even though I work in broadcast TV myself, or the cinema. I'm mostly Netflix, but
it was very kind of it's Hollywoodified, if that's what I'm going to say it. And they kind of brought in other things. At one point, I think they brought in a weird Slender Man type apparition.
That's right. Oh, that was really freaky.
Which was nothing to do with the Enfield case whatsoever.
No.
I mean, what I was going to say there is apparently the young girl, I forget her name, did have a full psychiatric evaluation and was given 100% clean bill of health with that. So then the next two possibilities are either it is a possession, or it's controversially hijinks and pranks and a big hoax. And I think that particular case has been controversial since the 1970s when it happened, and there's still some people that absolutely believe it did happen. For instance, police officers that saw things and experienced things, journalists, photographers that experience things. Harry Price, not Harry. Who am I thinking of? Not Harry Price. On the tip of my tongue, he's got a big moustache.
Guy Lyon Playfair.
Oh no! Oh, what's his name? Morris Gross. That's the one. Not Harry Price.
That's
Harry Price was Borley Rectory. That's right. Yeah, Morris Gross. And these people all swear blind that they've had weird things happen at them, including Lego bricks thrown at them, seeing levitation, things like that. And yet, there are some people who absolutely think that it's a complete fraud. There was the case that the girls were caught doing bangings and doing kind of hijinks things, which didn't help the case. But obviously, girls being girls, especially young ones, probably thought it was ever so funny having people round and winding them up. And yet you've got this case where one of the things they did with this alleged ghost Bill coming through is that they filled her mouth with water. The girl kind of like apparently channeled the voice of this Bill, and to test it, they filled her mouth with water and put tape over, so there's no way that she could fake it, and apparently it still happened. So yeah, it's a very strange one. And quite a disturbing one, actually, because apparently what wasn't hugely reported at the time, I don't think, was that it wasn't just this Bill she was channeling. There were multitudes of different spirits that were kind of coming through her. It's a strange one, and you got to wonder, kind of like where it's coming from. Is it really spiritual kind of souls communicating? Is it something darker? And if so, what's the purpose? So I guess that's going to be my next question, Alyson. What do you think is the purpose of these demonic entities or spirits doing this to people?
Well, as a religious person myself, my belief would be that it is that they want your soul. That is why they try to take over. And also, I mean, it's maybe not necessarily something demonic, but if it was a spirit, an unhappy spirit, they were unhappy that they didn't have a body anymore, then they might want to come into your body and use your body to do certain things that they would have done themselves in life. And that could be to do something bad. And I've often wondered this about certain criminals, you know, is it really them, or is there something with them that's, you know, made them do that?
This actually, Alyson, I don't know if you've looked into the serial killer cases. Apparently, a lot of the serial killers talk about the voices in their head telling them to do things. Which again, could it be schizophrenia or could it be demonic influence?
That's right. The son of Sam, that one. He said that it was the neighbour's dog was Satan and was giving him instructions and what to do. I'm not going to say anything either way because I don't really know. I don't know the case. I've not investigated anything about it. So I'm not going to say what I think. But yeah, I mean, obviously anything like that could be schizophrenia. But, you know, it still is there in the back of my mind that, you know, when I see some cases and I think, wow, that was pure evil. Where did that evil come from? What was the source of it? And was that something from outside the person influencing them? These are possibilities.
And even if we take the kind of like the stance, and it is a classical stance that, okay, these demonic realms, these kind of devil beings, they want your soul. The next question I would ask is, well, for what purpose? What are you going to, okay, let's say you've got a soul, stick it in a spiritual jam jar. What are you going to do with it? I mean, what is the point? Where's it leading? I mean, imagine you're like a demonic being on a big throne in hell with fire all over the place, and you've got these souls. Well, what are you going to use them for? What are you going to do with them?
Well, it takes the person's soul away from God, and that's their primary purpose. Is so that you are not with God. And
it's an insecurity thing.
It's what?
An insecurity thing.
And how do you mean?
Well, like, you know, if you go back to the playground at school, there'd always be a bully who will try and control other kids. And generally, psychologists would say, oh, it's an insecurity thing. They're doing it because they want to beef themselves up to be bigger, and they're actually quite frightened on the inside. So when people are trying to control you, it's more often than not, it's because they fear that they haven't got control over anything, or they're not good enough or something. And I think those traits still carry across into the spirit world. And maybe, you know, you're feeling a bit lost over there because you did not believe in a spirit world. And my understanding is that it's actually a lot easier to cross over to a spirit world when you've got a belief in it or an understanding to a certain extent. You can adapt to it a lot more. But when you're a diehard skeptic who resists any form of afterlife or paranormal or anything like that, when you finally die and you find yourself out of the body, you're confused as hell. But because of your limitations of your belief, you deny that such a thing can exist. So therefore, you go to the nearest source of communication, which happens to be the earth realm, because you're probably more likely stuck there. And so therefore, you're trying to influence people to communicate with you or control them in some way to get a message through. I don't think it's always necessarily evil. I think that it's a frustration on their part that they've realized that something's gone wrong, i.e. they've died, but they don't know what, and they need to try and reach out to people. And they can somehow influence matter because they're closer to it in this realm than, say, a spirit of our lovely aunt or uncle or parents or whoever are in the spirit world who can't influence matter as much because they're not on the same wavelength, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent point that you've made there. And I think that some cases of possession might not necessarily be, as you say, like negative. People have been possessed. It does come across as being a negative word, but there have been cases where people have started doing artwork that they didn't know anything about art, and also mediumship, physical mediumship, where a spirit speaks through a medium. I mean, that's kind of a form of possession, you might say, but the medium has the ability to send that spirit back, and let go of that spirit. So that, I mean, to me, that's a form of possession, temporary possession.
Yeah, there's invited into my home, come into my home for a nice cup of tea invite, but there's also breaking and entering. So they both actually have the same end result. They're both inside the home, but one's with permission and one isn't. And so, there's different ways of approaching it. But getting back to the Enfield poltergeist, Andy said that they tested this girl with water in her mouth and yet still the voice was heard. Now that reminded me when he said that it was very much like the medium Leslie Flint, who was a voice medium who apparently had voices appear in the room, and they had taped him up and put water in his mouth or fluids in his mouth to ensure that it wasn't him producing the voices by throwing his voice. So it makes me wonder if the girl in the Enfield poltergeist case was actually a similar kind of medium to Leslie Flint, but maybe was misinterpreted, or she had a bit of an open door policy, i.e. she didn't really know quite what was happening, and all sorts of voices were coming through, good and bad and all sorts. Because I mean, when Leslie Flint started out, he would find himself watching a film in a cinema, and in the darkness people would complain saying, stop all that talking back there, but apparently it's all these voices manifesting around him in the darkness because it's similar to a seance room, you see.
Wow. That's absolutely excellent, that point as well.
So I was going to say, you said you're ordained or something. Is that right? Or you're...
I'm a deacon.
A deacon?
Right.
So now, when I saw that on Facebook, you become a deacon, and I put a little like to it, I was a little bit confused, because I remember you saying that you met me at Witchfest. For those that don't know, it's like a witchcraft Wicca kind of event. And this one was in Glasgow, I believe, wasn't it?
That's right.
And I was selling my artwork there. So would you say that you were a witch or a pagan, and you suddenly got over to a more Christian side of things, or you have both sorts of camps of belief within you?
Yeah, I think for me it's both camps. It's all for me a spiritual journey. I'm not anti anything. I don't call myself a witch. I probably prefer the term Gnostic Christian nowadays, if I have to stick a label on it. But I mean, that doesn't mean that my pagan beliefs have just disappeared, into the ether. They're still there. I did start up Scott Witch, which is an online group. It started the Glasgow University Pagan Society. And did like a lot of arranging things for them. And I was also into spiritualism a little bit. At some point along the way, that wasn't quite enough. I was still looking for something. And that's when I encountered, if you want to say that, Mary, the Virgin Mary, and the angels also made their presence known. And I also started looking into Jesus as a solar deity, and I guess seeing Christ in nature and things like that, and asking for these things to make themselves known to me in a way that a pagan would understand. Now, for me, the Bible is a lot of allegory and symbolism, and a lot of the artwork is the same. And that's where I'm at. There's lots to say about Jesus as a solar deity, and behind most paintings, there's this sort of sun. Some people interpret it as a halo, but I interpret it as a sun behind angels and saints and whoever. And I got into Gnosticism as well, which can be applied to any religion. And it helps you to understand the symbolism and the mysteries within religion. So you've got things like astrotheology, which I see when it comes to this time of year. You were talking about Christmas before. I love Christmas. I really do. And astrotheology is something that I'm very into, and that shows you that at this time of year, the movement of the stars coincides with the Christmas story. So now let me think. The three stars on Orion's belt are also known as the three wise men. And where they come up in the sky is followed by Sirius, the brightest star. So the three wise men are following the star. Well, they're actually preceding the star rather than following it. And then the sun, the next morning, rises in the same place as the reborn sun on Christmas Day. So as a pagan, I know that on the 21st or the 22nd, the longest night, the winter solstice, that is when you might say the sun dies, and then it's 4 days later reborn on Christmas Day. Now, if you listen to the carols, a lot of them talk about this, about the returning light, and things like that. I can't remember offhand all the different Christmas carols. There's also something about the solar cross, but I can't remember now. But definitely it's a symbol of enlightenment too, as well as life, giving life and healing and things like that are all mentioned. And of course, these are things that the sun does do for us. It does give us life here on earth. It does bring us healing, both physically and psychologically. I mean, obviously, you don't want to be out in the sun too long, but we all need our daily dose of vitamin D. And so it would only be right, I think, to give thanks to the sun as something that does this for us. And our nature is to personify things. If we're of a religious or spiritual nature, we might personify something. And I think that that's what's happened here. But it's also an amalgamation of various different things from various different cultures. From the Egyptian culture comes into it as well, and even the Greek culture. The ancient mysteries of Eleusis come to mind when the Dionysus was sacrificed. So he represents wine, Bacchus, and the goddess of the grain, Demeter. So you might think of the bread and the wine. So that all kind of starts to come into play there. And so Dionysus and who's the other one? Is it Osiris? Because I don't know much about Egyptian mythology, I'm afraid. But a lot of sacrificed gods who have the same sort of journey if you like, and are worshipped in a very similar way. But that for me doesn't take anything away from going into a church and getting something from a service. It also doesn't take away from me the knowledge of the historical Jesus and what he did. So that, that's part of my faith too. It's not just about the symbolism, but it takes on board the symbolism. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I mean, have you seen the documentary Zeitgeist?
I have. It was fantastic. I loved that. I really did.
Destroying religions since 2015. Yeah, I thought it was really cool, actually. I sent that to a few Christian people who hated me for it, which I thought was very Christian of them.
Am I thinking of the same documentary? Because the one that I'm thinking of was more political.
I think there's a couple of versions, isn't there?
There are different versions. There is the best one, of course, is the first one that goes very much into the religious. There is a second version which is into 9/11, I think, and
the money stuff.
Yeah, the money system and the political thing. But the first one certainly talks about what you were talking about, Alyson, in terms of the Jesus story based on something like there's quite a few, maybe 30 or so different religious kind of people and deities within different cultures. So Mithra in the Roman culture, Horus in the Egyptian culture, etc., etc.
Yeah, but see, some people might use that to say, see, it's, you've stolen from that culture and whatever. But I just think for me, it adds something else to it. It doesn't detract from it. And I don't think it's Christianity itself that is really to blame for other things, for the way that some Christians have behaved in the past and the present. It's a completely separate thing. I mean, there was what do you call it? The Spanish Inquisition and the witch trials and all that kind of stuff. That's got nothing to do with Jesus Christ or Christian or the Christian faith. That was to do with people at that time and in that culture doing what they thought was right. At times it was primarily things like what have we done to suffer this plague? We must do better. Who's put a curse on us for X, Y, and Z? And they lived in this very paranoid culture. Now, that had nothing to do with Christianity. So for me, none of what I've said takes away from how I feel about it and how I feel about the spiritual side of life and of the teachings of Christianity. I think there's a lot to be learned there, and I'm saying that as a pagan too, because I'm still could go and commune with nature, and the outside can be my church as well. It doesn't have to be inside, but at the same time, churches can be beautiful places, and I really started to have a love of them when I went into churches in Italy. These sort of big Catholic churches, and lots of marble and lots of artwork. And it began to feel like your soul was being fed by all this imagery and all these surroundings, and elevating, your consciousness. So.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. Right. I think we've got to take a break now in the Paranormal Peep Show, but we're talking to Alyson Dunlop of the ADX Files, who is also a co-presenter here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. So, Alyson, we shall be carrying on with this wonderful conversation. We obviously want to go more into other paranormal subjects after the break, and we'll catch you in just a second.
See you in a bit.
Well, here's the President returning from his trip through the black hole. How did you pass the time, sir?
Listening to the Paranormal UK Radio.
Well, it's marvellous seeing a small Trump emerging from the mighty black hole.
Ooh, come in. Sit down, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome back to part 2 of the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Neil Geddes-Ward, and Andy Chaplin. And we're talking to Alyson Dunlop, who is a co-host here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and she presents the ADX Files. Alyson, welcome back.
Thank you.
So, Alyson, you have done a whole host of things, as well as being a radio presenter. You've been a deacon in churches. You're also a pagan, and you talked about possession and things like that. Now, obviously, that's connected with spiritualism, I presume, in a kind of roundabout way. You've got psychic powers yourself. Would that be correct?
Well, I think everybody's got psychic abilities. I do go to a development circle, which is run by my fiance, Ian Shanes, and that's helped me to connect and communicate with spirit, and especially in places where perhaps there's a problem, it's very helpful, I think, to have that ability to communicate with anything that might be there. So I go along to that. There's 2. It's on twice a month. So at the moment it's the second Tuesday and the fourth Wednesday, and I get a lot out of doing that.
And what sort of procedures do you do? I mean, I've been in psychic developing circles, and Andy's been in them. And does it follow the same sort of thing where you do meditation and then you try and do readings on each other?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. It's primarily you're working on yourself and developing yourself and your personality. And so it starts off with meditation. You might be partnered with somebody to do some mediumship with them, or more often it's healing that we'll do. And I do healing, spiritual, and Reiki, and so that is helpful for the development circle. And that's pretty much what we do. The meditation, we'll just stick on some music and go into, it's not guided or anything like that. It's very much like what comes to you, what is it that you need to see, and who are your guides. So nothing is fed to the person. It's just what they get, and it's the practice of that over time, that awareness, becoming aware of what is surrounding you, because it's as we are attached to the material world, the spiritual world has become invisible. So it's about helping people to see the two sides of the world.
And have you had a chance to put that in practice into public areas yet?
I have, yeah. A couple of times. I had a visit. I was called to a haunted club, private club in Ayrshire, and I wasn't told anything about it. But when I went in, the first thing was, I thought we were standing talking with the person who'd let us in, and the first thing was, I thought that somebody had come in the door, and I'd heard the floorboards creaking like somebody had walked through the hallway. I was standing right there, and I turned around to see who it was, and there was nobody there. We went upstairs, and on the top floor, I heard like 2 tuts, like that. And I thought, was that a tut, or is there a clock up here ticking? But there wasn't. So we separated into, either 1 or 2 going off on their own. And I wanted to do it on my own. I prefer silence and just to tune in. And it can take me a little while It's not always immediate, but I went up the stairs and this old woman came rushing forward and told me to get out. She was, get out, get out, get out. And I just communicated with her, and you communicate telepathically.
Did she look solid, or did she look translucent, or how did it look?
Well, you see these things, I guess, it's in your mind's eye. So you, as a medium, you see them as you see most of them like, a solid figure, but in your mind's eye. And I just said to her, it's okay, I'm just having a look around. I hope you don't mind. And she said, this is my house. I said, oh, you've got a lovely house, and just sort of humoured her and cajoled her, and said, people enjoy looking around your house, and you've not to be frightened of them if they come up, and all the rest of it, had this conversation with her. Now, when I told the events manager this, she was astonished, because one of the workers about 2 months before had come running down the stairs and said to her, could she go up and finish whatever it was she was doing? And the events manager said, why? And she said, because there's an old woman up there and she's telling me to get out. So that was probably the first time I've ever had real confirmation of something that I've picked up on. And so that was a real sort of boost to my confidence doing this kind of stuff. And I'd come downstairs they have this small museum, and I was in this small museum, and there was, it's an Air Force place. So there was somebody who was quite high up in the Air Force. I don't know the various different terms for whether, you've got an army colonel and all these kind of things. So whatever he was quite high up. And he walked round with me. And before I was going out, he said, he gave me some names, and he said, watch out for the old woman up the stairs. And I said, I know, I've met her. But he was dressed, when I described the clothes that he was wearing, one of the staff had seen the bottom, like his trousers and his shoes, in the mirror underneath the bar, I think it was, or behind the bar. Now, somebody else in there had seen a solid, not in their mind's eye, a lady dressed in white, but it was like 1970s type trousers, and she was dressed all in white, and they blinked, like hard blink, and when they opened their eyes again, she was gone, and she was on the dance floor. So I'd gone into the dance hall. It's quite a big hall, and sat on the stage, because I'd been all round it, and so I thought I'll sit on the stage, close my eyes, and nothing was happening, nothing. And I said, well, I'm here. It's your chance to come forward and give me information, show yourself in some way, but you're not showing yourself just now. I'm not picking up anything. And just at that, all the windows, there's these big glass windows down one side of the room, they all began to shake. They all began to tremble in a way that I would have been surprised if it was a lorry outside. But I did ask the manageress and the bar staff and the president. Was this something that happened regularly, traffic outside perhaps? And they said no, they had never witnessed anything like this. So that was something else that I was given proof with. But so I've had a few things. I've seen a negative entity in a hospital who was trying to get, it seemed to me, an old lady who was extremely ill in the next room. And, it was the point where her family were outside and extremely upset and told, that she probably wasn't going to make the night. And so they were in sitting with her, taking turns. And this dark shadow that I'd seen started moving towards her. And I called upon the angels, Michael and Raphael, to give her strength and protection and healing, and surround her bed with healing angels and the negative. And I told this spirit to leave, and it did. It started moving back, and the next day the woman had some kind of miraculous healing, that she was doing really well, and well enough to be moved to a room on to a ward. So that was another thing that happened.
So you got to wonder what on earth was going on there, because I mean, presumably she wasn't a bad woman, she wasn't a bad person. So why a darkness, being attracted to her?
Well, I think the fact that she was perhaps old and frail and ill and vulnerable. People in hospitals are obviously vulnerable because they're sick. And one of the nurses had come in, and I didn't tell her what I'd seen because I didn't really want locked up, So I kept that to myself. But I asked her, I told her what I was into, the radio show and all that kind of stuff. And I said, I bet you see lots of things in hospitals. And she said, yeah, there's something out there. And she pointed to where this dark shadow I had seen it. And she said, last week, an old man woke up, he was screaming. And when they ran in, he said somebody was pulling him out the bed by his feet. Did they say, sorry to stop you, did they say something or someone? I think they said something, actually, when I think about it. But it's quite a while ago now, and I can't be 100% sure about that. But, he obviously didn't see anything, so he might have said something's pulling me out of the bed. And so they calmed him down, gave him a cup of tea, calmed him down, and he went back to sleep. And a nurse was in putting something in a cupboard, and she just felt this invisible hand go clamping over her arm, and she ran out of there like she was Sebastian Coe, Yeah. I can well imagine. So that, whether or not I had, but I believe that I had picked up on something there. And another thing that happened was I didn't realise at first that I was dreaming, but I was in my mum's old house, and she was standing with me, and I saw somebody coming up the stairs, and I thought, I know that face. And when they came in the room, it was my mum's best friend who had died, maybe about 6 months or maybe even a year before. And I thought, she can't be here. And I turned to my mum and I said, I think this is a dream, but we'll just go with it, okay? and she's like, okay. And so we walked round with this lady. At
this point in time, was your mum alive?
Yes, she is. She's still alive.
Okay.
So we walked round with this lady, and she was not happy about being dead. She said, this is not what was supposed to happen. And she was quite annoyed, and things were not the way that she had thought they should be. Now she had died because she fell downstairs and hit her head, and that was how she died. So it was an unexpected, very quick death. After my second kidney transplant, she appeared in the room. Now I saw her quite clearly. And it seemed to me, had been given a job to do. Now this would have been important to this lady. She had been an auxiliary nurse. She was a very active Christian in a church and was very used to helping people. And so it seemed to me that she had been given a job that may well have been in a hospital. And she had this clipboard and she said, everything's fine. I'm fine. So it seemed to me that she was a lot happier and contented with the way that things had worked out for her, and the way probably that things had worked out for me with the operation. So that was another thing that I saw, and I saw that was quite a clear image. I wouldn't have said in my mind's eye, or if it was in that kind of in between. I mean, obviously, I just had this big operation. I was on medication, and when I was in hospital before, I was quite ill at the time. So people might say that, or you were just on, you just had lots of drugs, or you just were seriously ill, or whatever. But when you're in that place that's maybe a bit closer to death than other people, I think you are more likely to see such things. You are more likely to see through that veil into the other world. It becomes much clearer. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these kinds of places, especially where humans congregate and there's vast emotions and things going on. Obviously, like a hospital would be. There would be a lot of deaths. There would be a lot of people towards the end of their lives. There would be a lot of grief with the families coming to visit, etc. And this is where a lot of paranormal stuff does tend to happen.
Absolutely,
where humans congregate, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of talks on this area of hospitals and hauntings, and as Andy says, that you're more likely to find spirits lurking around hospitals than actually graveyards, in my opinion, simply because that's where people are freshly passing over. They're freshly confused. They're perhaps trying to re-enter their body, which they've literally only left a few minutes ago. They're not likely to try and re-enter their body if they're hanging around in a graveyard and their body has been, say, at the mortuary for about 2 weeks and then in the ground. I think that's the living's viewpoint of where the dead should be, because for them, that's where the dead end up, in the ground. So therefore, the spirits will be coming out of those corpses, at midnight or something stupid like that. Whereas the reports, the evidence seems to come in that a lot of these sightings from nurses and other patients and auxiliary workers and ambulance people all seem to suggest that, they've seen lots of different, apparitions or deceased patients and things like that. I mean, I was actually told this a few years ago, and whether this is true to all nurses and doctors in the UK, but this particular nurse that I had heard about was doing training, and apparently the latest, and this was probably about 9 years ago then, the latest training for nurses at that point in this particular hospital was that if they find they've got a spirit attachment to themselves when they go home after a shift, they have to go back to the hospital to have it dealt with in some way. Never was explained to me what that dealing with in some way was, but it's obviously become such an issue that these nurses, when they go home,
are you saying this is like official training documents?
Well, this is what I haven't actually gathered, but apparently this nurse that was going through training, it was relayed back to me. She was told this as part of her training. Now, as I say, this was just one particular hospital, but I know that nurses train at different hospitals for different things. So my guess is that, I mean, it'd be great if there's any people that do work in hospitals can enlighten us on, the official viewpoint of nurses training, if you want to write in and tell us. But my understanding was that nurses and doctors, maybe more nurses, are trained to have to deal with this sort of thing because it's become such an issue that people are dying left, right and centre in hospitals, as you'd expect. It comes as no surprise. But obviously when the dead pass over, the spirit passes out of the body, a great deal of them are confused about what's happened. But also, if you actually think about it, when you're in hospital, the first person you go to when you're not well is the nurse. Oh, nurse, can I have a drink of water? So, of course, when you're out your body, who do you go to? You go to the nurse again. So it becomes an attachment, and they follow them home. Of course, the spirit doesn't realise they're dead, but they're obviously hanging around the nurse in some sort of, trying to get some answers to why are they feeling a bit strange, or why is everybody else ignoring them, or something like that. And obviously nurses, I think, tend to be probably slightly more clairvoyant than the average person, because they're much more sympathetic and caring, and maybe that opens up a bit of a clairvoyant sort of sensitivity about them.
Possibly. I mean, my mum was an auxiliary nurse, and she's one of these, I don't really believe this sort of stuff, it's interesting, but my mum is one of the most psychic people that I know, and she just doesn't realise it or want it to be the case.
There we go,
she is really quite, if she went to a development circle, I think she would do far better than me. She really is very, very psychic. I think what would probably happen would be some kind of form of counselling for anyone who thought that they had taken an attachment home with them, and that might come from their supervisors, or it might come from the hospital chaplain, for example, who would no doubt have plenty of experience in such matters. I don't think that my mum ever mentioned anything like that. I doubt it. But I have to tell you, it's not really a funny story. It wasn't funny at the time, but I briefly worked as an auxiliary nurse just for 3 months. And on this occasion, I had taken this lady. She wasn't feeling very well. She'd been kind of grumpy all day, and I'd taken her down to the toilet. I was waiting outside for her, and I heard her saying, I don't feel very well. So I went in and I crouched down in front of her and I said, are you okay? And she tipped over and died on top of me.
Oh my God.
So, yeah. I wasn't an auxiliary nurse for very long after that.
No, I can see why.
yeah. I don't think, I didn't really experience any, attachment of anything like that. So I don't really know, about that.
Neil, remind me what the advice was if a nurse did get an attachment. What did they say they could do?
Well, basically, as I remember it, it was if a nurse comes home after shift and they're at home and they feel there's a spirit around them in some way, they've got to return to the hospital pronto, pretty much straight away. Jump on the bus, taxi, whatever, car, get back to the hospital, and after that, it becomes a little bit of a grey area. I wasn't quite sure what happens. I presume you report back to your supervisor, and then they maybe talk to the chaplain at the hospital or someone who is good at dealing with it. Maybe they've got an unofficial spiritualist lurking around the corner or something. I don't know.
Wow.
Could be. Well, I mean, Ian, he always says to people, if you feel different before you leave this circle, don't leave. And if it's when they get home, they have to contact him and say to him that they feel that they might have something, they've taken something with them. But he always advises never leave a circle if you feel that you have picked up something.
Well, that would definitely, I'd be in the circle, I'd go home and I'd say, I feel like a nurse. You definitely left the wrong person. Now, an interesting story, as we're on the subject of nurses, my older brother is married to a lady who's got kids from a previous marriage, and they're grown up now, but I forget which one it is, and I won't say their names, but I think it was the oldest one, has started a job as a nurse. So she's a student nurse, and she's working at a hospital in Exeter or somewhere in Devon anyway. And she was on the night shift apparently. And one of the patients asked her if it's possible to get some extra pillows to make her more comfortable for sleeping. So, this young girl said, yeah, sure, I'll go and get them for you. So she went to this room where they store all the pillows and blankets in this cupboard. Now, in the very same room, there is also a hospital bed that's already pre-made up so that if they need to put another patient in that bed, they can do so, and it's all prepared. So the room is full of pillows and things in the cupboard, and right beside it is this bed that's all nicely, neatly made up. So this girl goes to the cupboard, she opens the cupboard doors, starts getting the pillows out, then she shuts the cupboard doors, and the bed has been whisked to the other end of the room, and all the blankets have been thrown off it, and there's no one else in the room.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
Spooky indeed, yeah.
Yeah, that's an angry spirit.
My brother told me that, and he's not. He doesn't believe in this sort of stuff, but he told me that.
Wow. Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And then the paranormal group, we did have a guy. I don't know if he was there, Andy, on this particular occasion, but this guy and his girlfriend, the ghost hunters is the term, and they were doing research on various paranormal stuff. But his day job or evening job, depending on what shift he was on, he was an RAC repairman. And he said that the RAC has a contract to go and repair or pick up ambulances that are broken down. Now, he said that he's allowed to, as part of his job, if there's an ambulance that's damaged in some way, but it's not safe to drive, but it's still drivable, he's allowed to drive it back to the depot to get repaired. So on this particular occasion, he was called to go and pick up an ambulance, something wrong with it. It wasn't safe to drive for the ambulance drivers, but he would take the risk and actually drive it. So he got in the ambulance by himself, buckled up, adjusted the mirror, and lo and behold, he saw a person in the back of the ambulance via the mirror, who was sitting in there, and it appeared to be a patient that had died, but they were still sitting there looking at him. And he was freaked out by it. So although he was a ghost hunter and he's used to ghosts and spirits and things like that, it freaked him out slightly because he was in there by himself. He rang his girlfriend up, who was his fellow ghost hunter, and he said, "Oh my God, there's a blooming patient sitting in the back here, a ghost of a patient sitting in the back of the ambulance. What do I do?" And she shouted down the phone, "Well, talk to them, say, 'Hello, how are you?' or something like that, He goes, "No," he says, "I can do it if you were with me, but I can't do it right now by myself." Oh. So what he did was he turned the mirror the other way so he wouldn't see the reflection, and it put him off. And he didn't want to look in the back. He just had to drive the ambulance all the way to the repair depot to get it sorted. But,
oh, my God.
It seems, again, an ambulance is like a mini hospital, if you like. It's on 4 wheels. It's got all that medical equipment in there. And people sometimes pass over before they get to hospital, and they're going to die in the ambulance, you see? Yeah. And so, again, they're either that's their last impression, psychic impression they created in the ambulance, and the spirit has moved on, but they create that like snapshot photograph image of themselves, or they are actually lurking around in that ambulance for whatever reason. Don't know.
Yeah. And it would be best to try to guide them over to the other side in that situation. You don't want to spend your eternity in an ambulance.
Well, no,
until the next psychic medium comes along.
Yeah, especially if Boris Johnson's selling it on. Now, there is another ambulance story, I think, and then we can leave it and move on to other stuff. But an ambulance story, a hospital story. Again, this was told to me by a nurse. It's not something I read in a book. It's a real person that told me this. And this girl, again, she said, now, I don't normally talk about this sort of stuff, but it's only because you're, meaning me, talking about ghost stuff to her, because it was all gathered around a sort of summer camp fireside, and I was telling the ghost stories, of course, and it prompted her to tell her story. And she said, I work in a hospital on the south coast, and I didn't ask which one, but I kind of guessed that it could be Southampton Hospital. And she said, now, I know this to be true because I spoke to the doctors that it happened to. And she said, in this hospital, there is a certain floor, and I'll say the 3rd floor because I don't know which. I'll say the 3rd floor, where all the seriously ill patients are on these, heart monitors and machines and all sorts of things to keep them ticking over, as it were, but they're being closely monitored by these machinery. And if one of them flatlines or has a heart attack or crashes, it sets off an alarm on a pager of the doctors who are up on the 4th floor. And so as soon as someone flatlines, their pager goes off, and rather than take the lift, because it takes extra time for the lift to come up and down the thing, it's just easier to run down the flights of stairs, a couple of flights of stairs, and into the 3rd floor, and there you are, and say, right, where's this patient that's died or whatever? We're going to try and resuscitate them. And of course, what happened was their pager went off. So a doctor and 2 medics rushed down the stairs. They're rushing down the first set of stairs, and they get to the second set of stairs, and they see this girl sitting on the stairs, and they go to her, what are you doing here? And all this girl could say is, my stomach really hurts. My stomach really hurts. And they said, well, look, stay here. We can't do anything to help you because we got to go and see someone, but we'll send someone up to you, okay? And they rush on down into the fourth floor or third floor, wherever it is, where all these patients are. They go to resuscitate this patient that's died on the table, and it's the same patient that they've just seen in the stairwell.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So basically she had died, floated out of her body, somehow became trapped in the stairs, and she was in agony. Now, I told this story to my mum, and my mum said, well, why would she be in agony if she's just died? And I said, well, I think that her astral cord, if you like, that's the part that connects the spirit body to the physical body, has snapped. And because she's still operating to a certain extent within our world, because she was seen by the doctors and was heard to speak, therefore she's resonating at our frequency to a certain extent, I think her soul or spirit is still feeling the pain of this world to a certain extent. And because that is like an umbilical cord being snapped or pulled, it was causing her a lot of pain. But I think that once she resonates up to the spirit world, a different frequency, that pain would soon vanish. And of course, when they came back, she had gone. She wasn't there, you see. Right. So she'd been taken. So, yeah, interesting stories. And I think it happens on a weekly basis around people. So, again, if you're a nurse, doctor, medical worker or anything, and you want to write to us and tell us about your ghost stories in hospitals, we'd love to hear it. Maybe you'd like to come on as a guest. We'd love to hear that as well. Just contact us on our Facebook page, which is a Paranormal Peep Show on Facebook, and leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you.
I also think, Neil, maybe we should open up to all services, because there was a show on Sky called Paranormal 911. Obviously, 911 meaning the code for emergency services in America. Yep. Over in England, it's 999, obviously. But there were a lot of stories in America about police officers, fire officers, paramedics, all sorts have encountered really strange paranormal stories. And we'd definitely love to hear it from, let's call it Paranormal 999, any UK-based fire service, police, paramedics, ambulance drivers, surgeons even, any kind of paranormal stories from the services would be really interesting. Even actually could expand it to the armed forces, because I personally know some people who are in the armed forces or have been in the armed forces who have also experienced some very odd things going on, RAF stations and army bases, army barracks. So yeah, we'd love to hear those kind of things.
Ooh, cool. Now, moving on then. Thank you for that, Andy. Moving on. Alyson, you are in the SPI. Is that correct?
Yes, Strange Phenomena Investigations. I've been... I was a member back in the mid-90s, and then I went off and did the Pagan Society stuff, and then I came back and got back in touch with Malcolm. He was down in England by this time, and he gave me his blessing to carry on with SPI in Scotland. So I named it SPI Scotland, and started up a group, and then we do conferences now once a year, and all that's going really well. So that's SPI.
Okay, and now Malcolm is Malcolm Robinson, and regular listeners of the Paranormal UK Radio Network might remember his name because he's appeared on quite a few shows on the network, and you've known Malcolm quite a few years, I gather, then. So he recently did a tour, didn't he, to do with UFOs and things? He
did, because it was the 40-year anniversary of Strange Phenomena Investigations, and that was born out of the Bob Taylor incident in 1979. 9th of November, I think I'm right in saying there. It was the 40th birthday of SPI. So he gave a fantastic talk on this subject, and it was standing room only. In fact, we had to turn a few people away from that event. And he gave all the evidence, everything that there was to know about it, some things that I didn't know. I wish I'd taken notes, actually, but there will be a video. It was videoed, so I don't know where that will be uploaded or if it will be available to buy. I'm not quite sure what's happening there. But it was a fantastic talk all about this incident, which, if you want, I'll relate to you. If you want
absolutely,
me to.
I know the story roughly, but
okay.
The listeners, obviously, that don't know about the Bob Taylor incident, I'm sure they'd love to hear it.
Okay, so Bob Taylor was a forestry worker in the Livingston area, and he was out one day with his dog, walking through the forest, checking. I believe he was checking that there was a field that sometimes sheep would come through. But whatever he was checking, he came down and he saw this object, and it kept on appearing and disappearing. It was sort of dome shaped with a flange round the bottom of it, and I think. Now, there's been various versions of exactly what it looked like, but anyway, so he's looking at this and in amazement, and these two other things dropped from the bottom of it, and they were kind of like World War II bombers with the spikes.
War mines, sea mines.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And they rolled towards him. And he smelled this, I think it was like a chemical or an electrical smell or something like that. And they tugged on his trousers and ripped them at the pockets. He passed out, and when he came to, his car wouldn't start. He had to crawl however many miles just about to get home. He was in quite some state. He was, scratched and bruised and all the rest of it. When he got there and his wife asked him what on earth had happened to him, he said that he had been attacked by a UFO. She immediately called his manager, who came round. She called the doctor, who also came round to check him over. They then called the police. He was not somebody who made up stories. He was in a state. They wanted to check that he was okay. He was taken to hospital. They did tests. There was nothing showed up, like no epileptic fit, no brain lesions or tumours or anything like that. Nothing showed up. And the police investigated it as an attack, an assault by person or persons unknown. And that was how it was termed. Now, I don't know if that's still an open case because it's never been solved, or whether when he died that was closed. I'm really not too sure about that. But the policemen who were involved in that case were at Malcolm's talk, and I think that even in itself says a lot. These people 100% believed Bob Taylor and what had happened to him. Because of, I guess, his recounting the story and just generally the kind of person that he was, who was not at all interested in UFOs and anything like that. So that was the Bob Taylor incident, and there's been lots of variations of reasons for that happening, and some people still believe it might have been a seizure of some kind, but as I say, that was medically ruled out. Some people have said it was I think there was something similar on Doctor Who about a month or so previously. That was another thing. I don't know if Bob Taylor watched Doctor Who, so we can't really say whether his imagination might have picked this up. But even if it did, why did he see it like that? And why did he pass out? And why are his trousers ripped? You know, Malcolm still has those trousers, pass them around the entire audience. You know, so these are questions. I mean, that's physical evidence there. And these were trousers that were like really like workman's trousers, you know, they're really thick material, really difficult to tear. And they've been torn to just slits down the side. So it's a puzzle. What I don't believe certainly is the somebody said it was a mirage of Venus. And I think that is just total, I'm sorry, but I don't mean to make fun of anyone, but to come out of that is total stupidity. It really is. It's just, how could you even come to that conclusion?
How can you press charges to Venus for criminal assault as well? Exactly. Now, I think across the other side of the motorway, there's this other facility at barbed wire and things like that. But he wasn't there. That's not where he was. And also, now I can't remember exactly what happened, but somebody said their husband worked at that facility and there was no barbed wire when he was there. She'd actually texted him at the time while she was sitting listening to the talk, and he confirmed that that was completely impossible to happen. So that was another theory knocked out the window. So whatever happened to Bob Taylor, we don't know. But we know that something happened to him, and that is what he says he saw. So if we assume that he's telling the truth, then that is what he saw. What it is might not, we can't really maybe take that at face value, but that is what he said he saw. So that was the Bob Taylor experience. And quite a terrifying one for the man as well. A lot of these UFO cases can be when you got these things that come out and just grab you. I mean, I also heard Malcolm's talk, because he did the same talk or a version of the talk at the UFO Academy. Andy, I think it was when they were doing one of these events down there, and I saw it. And again, I held the trousers as well and saw the holes in them and things. I did ask if I could try them on, but I was declined. But yeah, it was interesting because I think I was listening to the other guys from Glasgow who do the show on the network, Weirder Things, Innes and I forget his name now, who present that show, and they were talking about this because they had gone to the same evening that you had. They
were there too.
Yeah, and they were talking about this Doctor Who theory about the TARDIS dematerializing, and had Bob Taylor seen the TARDIS dematerializing, somehow conjectured it into this UFO. Now, the thing is, my thing about that is, if you had seen the TARDIS dematerializing and appearing, surely he would have hallucinated the actual Doctor Who TARDIS.
Yeah.
Not a round spherical saucer or dome-shaped UFO.
I agree.
And also, why didn't he, for instance, if it was Doctor Who, have Cybermen coming out and attacking him, or Daleks coming out and attacking him? You know, for him to describe something that you would not associate with spaceships, i.e., what look like World War II landmine things that go in the sea, that you know, they explode near ships and things, don't they? These things.
Yeah.
That's how the best kind of analogy he could give to these things, but they rolled towards him. Which was quite an imaginative, if you're making up, quite an imaginative way of doing it. You know, you could have said, an alien came out with a ray gun and zapped me and I fell backwards. But no, these two mechanical things would seem harder to, harder to believe, came towards him and knocked him out. Now, I did ask Malcolm whether Bob Taylor was regressed under hypnosis, and he said no, he wasn't, which is a bit unfortunate because I'm sure that would have been a second level to this story. Unfortunately, we never got it. That would have been great. But
I don't know if that is unfortunate because hypnosis regression is a really dodgy business. It has a very big risk of false memory syndrome. And then you can't tell the truth from fiction after that. So I tend to, when it comes to things like this, advise people not to try regression unless it's just to sharpen what they've already seen, but to take with a heavy pinch of salt anything new that appears in it. I'm seeing that as a hypnotherapist. I'm a trained hypnotherapist, cognitive. I'm a cognitive behavioural hypnotherapist. So I do know what I'm talking about when I say that.
Right.
And I've done self hypnosis to see what would happen, and I did conjure up some things from the imagination. Or did I? That's the thing. That is what you're left with. Did that happen? Did it not happen? And until it fades again, like a few weeks later, you are left with that that notion of it did happen, or it feels like it happened. And this was like an alien encounter that I went into. But it did feel afterwards that it had actually happened. And I thought, right, because I wanted to experience that to see, like, right, false memory syndrome, how does it happen? And could I experience it myself? So there you go.
But it seemed to be quite useful in the case of Betty and Barney Hill, the people that were abducted in 1961, who were coming down through Canada to North America to their home, and they were traveling overnight, and they were abducted by a craft of some sort and taken aboard. And it's only when they got home, like 4 hours later than they should have done, they thought, well, we remember this weird light in the sky, and that was it, kind of thing. But someone suggested they get hypnotized, and they went through it. And in those days, there wasn't really any kind of back catalogue of knowledge to fall back on about aliens and ETs and flying saucers. It was all a bit of a new thing for people, because not many people, certainly from the media's point of view, were being abducted. But they came forward with an incredible story of being taken on board, and even to the point where Betty talked about one of the aliens coming through into the room and trying to take her teeth out. And apparently it's because they'd already previously located Barney's teeth, which came out fairly easily, and they were confused because obviously Barney was wearing dentures, and they assumed Betty's would be the same. So they came and tried to take her teeth out, and they wouldn't come out because hers were real. And, but that only came through under hypnosis. It wasn't suggested to her or anything like that. It was just one of these things.
Yeah, but she did know that the thing about Barney and his teeth coming out and all that. It was in her mind. But I'm not saying that that's the case, but I'm just saying it was in her mind.
There was also the star chart thing when it was late with Stanton Friedman, I believe, doing the research on that. And this lady who was an astronomer, Betty asked one of the aliens, "Where do you come from?" And he said, "Well, do you know where you are in the galaxy?" And she says, "No." He says, "Well, we can't really explain to you where we're from, even if you don't know where you're from." But it did show her a sort of star chart of sorts, and under hypnosis, she recalled the points of where the stars were. And it took this lady, I can't remember her name, something like 10 years to work out. And obviously this was before computers and CGI or anything like that. She was using small beads on things on a sort of a cube-shaped wire box or something with threads going through them, and she was trying to create literally a miniature star system using the drawing, which could then be viewed at all different angles sort of work out what star system it could be. And it took this lady who was an astronomer sort of like so many attempts to get it right. She was very, very dedicated. And it took something like 10 years to come up with this star system in a three-dimensional model that she had made that matched Betty's drawing, and it turned out to be Reticuli or whatever. I can't say the star system.
Zeta Reticuli.
That's the one. That's the one. I often pop by there to get bread. So that's where that one's coming in. That's supposedly where all the greys are coming from, you see, supposedly anyway.
Well, they're supposed to be the negative ones, aren't they? The Zeta Reticulans.
Well, especially if they're taking your teeth out, I guess so. Yeah. Very, very interesting, because this is before the greys really made an appearance on the world stage. This was the first kind of description of them. They had obviously perhaps made appearances elsewhere, maybe at the Roswell crash, for instance, and elsewhere. But this was the first time they'd become more known about on the world stage of abductions, because, as I say, abductions were not very well known about. And also, the other thing about that particular case was that Barney was a black man and Betty was a white lady. And in 1961, it wasn't a very, very favourable to have an interracial marriage at that time in America. And you'd have got a lot of bad press for a white woman marrying a black man. And yet they still came out and told their story. And they faced that kind of double ridicule, if you like, for the interracial connection, but also for the fact they've been taken aboard this craft. For people that want to know more about that, it's called The Interrupted Journey, the book, by John G. Fuller, who wrote an account of it. And I think you can probably still get copies of it on Amazon or second-hand copies, but brilliant book, worth reading. I think it was later made into a film with James Earl Jones playing part of Barney, who is obviously famous for the voice of Darth Vader. Just my little anecdotal things there. So there we go. Yeah. So hypnotherapy, I do believe it has its place. I believe, though, you got to, you can't, as we had this guy do a talk for us the other night at the Paranormal Meetup group called Doug Buckingham, and he said that he's regressed many people, but he says the key is not to lead them with your own ideas of what it could be. For instance, he said that in this particular regression, this lady had a fear of water, and so he said, just go back, keep going back, where'd you find yourself? And she says, I'm on this big boat. And she turned out to be 5 years old or something like that. And this boat is out in the Atlantic. And so Doug thought, okay. And what happens next? She goes, well, we've hit an iceberg and we're sinking. And so he said, and what's your name? And she said her name, whatever it was. And so a few weeks later, they checked up on the passenger list of the Titanic to see who had died. And this name that this lady had given as a little girl had come up. Wow. And it was after this kind of hypnosis regression that her fear of water then went away, you see. So, but he said, I was absolutely aware of not to bring up any words like, oh, are you on the Titanic? No leading question. So long as, you know, when you regress these people, you don't want to say, are you on a spaceship with greys? No, you don't want to say that. You just want to say what happens next and just let them tell the story. Because you spoke to Calvin Parker recently, didn't you?
I did, yes, that's right.
And he's been regressed, hasn't he, a few times?
I believe so, yeah. Very interesting guy, very interesting incident. That was the last show that I did. If listeners want to give that a wee listen.
And that's the Pascagoula case?
The Pascagoula incident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
very interesting.
What's your take on that?
I don't really know. Like I say, it's interesting. It mirrored, I thought, the A70 UFO incident in Scotland a little bit. I'm quite interested with these incidents that affect particularly two men. You know, I've heard of this several times. Two men that are like on their own, and And that was the case in the A70 UFO incident. There was another case down in England. There was somebody at one of the conferences down there that I heard relating the story. And quite often, one of the people, one of the men, don't want to get involved with ufology and they're much more shy about it. The A70 incident was very interesting. The two gentlemen were coming back from Edinburgh. They were going to a place that should have only taken them, I think, half an hour to get to, and they ended up. They came to a part where the reservoir was, and there was this big UFO across the road. When Gary put his foot down and drove underneath it, it emitted these like shimmering lights, and everything went black. The next thing, they were out on the road, like wavering on the road. Their seatbelts were undone. And when they got to their destination, they had an hour and a half of missing time that they could not account for. And they had marks on their body. They had nightmares the next day, and for the next few weeks, they experienced these kind of things. They got in touch with SPI, and Malcolm arranged a regression for them, and they come out with a lot of these things under regression about aliens taking them aboard this ship and conducting experiments on them. So that I thought was a similar, but I'm quite interested in this. There seems to be a thing, with two men being abducted. And I just wonder why.
Was there any mention in this regression of seeing any aliens or what they might look like?
I think they were described as being like greys. I can't remember now fully, but the entire story is online. It's written by Brian Allen, who's one of our speakers, incidentally, at the UFO conference in June next year. And he gives a full account online of the A70. It's the A70 UFO incident.
When did this happen, this particular case, Alyson, the A70 incident?
I think it was the early 90s that happened.
It rings a bell. I'm sure I've heard Malcolm talk about it at the talk. There's my mind's a bit blurry in some of these cases because I think one blurs into the other about what sort of instances happen and like loads of aliens floating across a field to people. But that might be another case or something. I don't know. But yeah, very interesting. So I think we're coming to the end of the show now. So anything you want to just say quickly before we wrap up?
No, nothing from me.
Not even a Merry Christmas to anybody?
Oh, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I hope that some of the listeners can join us at next year's conference. It'd be nice to meet people.
Okay. And where's that taking place and when?
It's in the Queen Margaret Union in Glasgow, University Gardens. And that's on Saturday, the 6th of June at 10 a.m.
And how do they get tickets? Do they buy on the door or is the website or something?
If they email me at spiscotland@gmail.com, then I can sort out tickets. And if they do that before the 25th of December, then they'll get the ticket for £9 instead of £10. So there you go.
A brilliant bargain before Brexit. Yeah.
The bargain anyway. I mean, like at £10, that's for like 7 speakers a whole day.
That's really good.
A whole day of it. And we also have like a raffle and there's stalls and, all that kind of stuff. So it's really very, very cheap to go to.
Do you only have Scottish speakers there or is it any speaker from any country or UK?
We don't only have Scottish speakers, but we do try to promote Scottish speakers because they don't really get, they kind of get forgotten, I think, you know. So we do try to encourage our people in our native land to get up there and say something. And there's been a few first-time speakers that we've had, and they've been fantastic. And it's given them a chance to get their research out there. And it might just be like Mark Anderson. He's been on my show, and he goes around all these big houses, big castles and houses and things like that, and collects stories of hauntings. So that's like very worthwhile stuff that he's doing, and he's very dedicated to it. And then there's Dennis Doyle, who gave a talk on Mothman last year, which is not talked about very much. So, you know, there's a few first-time speakers, and they both those gentlemen did brilliantly. They really did. And I was delighted that it gave them the chance to get up there and do that. So, yeah. So, I mean, we're not solely, it's not solely Scottish speakers. We have had Peter Robbins from the US.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we this coming year, 2020, Cal Cooper is going to be coming along, and so he's coming up from England. So there will be, there have been, and there will be. We don't sort of say no, you can't come because you're not Scottish.
No, that's right.
You can't speak at our conference, but we do prefer to get it. Create a space for Scottish speakers to
platform for them to get their stories.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great stuff. Okay, all right, but thank you very, very much indeed, Alyson, for taking part in the Paranormal Peep Show, for joining us. Finally got there in the end. Andy, any last words?
No, just wish people a very Merry Christmas. Hope you get lots of presents, mince pies, mulled wine, and thoroughly drunk.
Absolutely, and won't the Queen's speech be interesting this year?
Another Annus Horribilis.
Yes.
That's worth paying a license fee alone just to listen to that.
Oh dear.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, it's a very Merry Christmas from myself, Alyson, and Andy on the Paranormal Peep Show, and we wish you a wonderful 2020. And it's good night from us. Bye bye. Thanks for listening.
Bye bye.